How are you tonight? If any of you tried to watch the video that I sent this morning about Syria and had some issues with the map in the video, we fixed it. So there was a little problem and we fixed it. So if it was weird and you missed the map really to understand where all these proxies or the different parts of the axis of resistance or axis of evil are, you can watch it again and get a little bit better version of it. But this is Jewish current events and Jewish future. We're going back now 2,000 years. Last year we ended with the great revolt of the Jews against the Romans. Didn't end well for us. Oh, thank you, Mark. Do you all have the outline that begins with 2nd century CE? Okay. Thank you. Because last week I wanted to be smart and I said I would give it to you at the end of the class, and then I realized that I didn't do it only after half of you had left. Please come, sit. We need more of that. So you need. You have? Yeah, I don't want it to share because some people like to write some notes or whatever you want. Okay. So last week we ended at the year of 70, at the end of the Great Revolt against the Romans. We lost and paid a tremendous price. The Romans devastated the Jewish community, especially in Jerusalem. They killed, some scholars say, 900,000 people overall during the entire period of the revolt, a huge amount of the Jewish population. They exiled some, and they destroyed the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. This temple was built, the second temple, at the year of 5. Good evening. Oh, we have more. Since you are late, you'll have to sit next to me. Good evening. It's 6:30. Now it's 6:32. You've known me for a long time. I don't believe in the concept of Jewish time. I take offense when people say Jewish time, and I try to respect your time. 70 CE, no more temple, big exile. Jews stopped living in Jerusalem since that period. Where did they go? Jerusalem, if you can see here, I have to. Do you see Jerusalem more or less? They all moved to the Galilee and to another place that is called Yavne. Okay, towards the end of the class, I shared with you that the leader of the Pharisees, or at least the leader of the more sane, more responsible Jewish group, his name was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was able to escape Jerusalem, pretended it was dead, and his students took his coffin to the leader of the Romans, to Vespasian, and he asked him to allow the leaders of the Jews, the teachers, the rabbis, to get out of Jerusalem and to establish a new center, and this is Yavne. Okay? And for reasons that are not clear to us, the Roman commander agreed to that, and that really saved the whole scholarship of Judaism. So Yavne was one important center, and as you see, the Galilee up north with some cities that now there are nice excavations there, like Tziporim and Tiberias and other places in the north, not in Jerusalem. Now, even after this revolt was over, there was never peace and quiet in the region. Jews wanted to defeat somehow the Romans, to rebuild their temple. And at the year of 132, and that you have in this handout, the new one from today, they revolted again. This is called the Bar Kokhba revolt. Bar Kokhba was a very charismatic man. Bar Kokhba was not his name. Only recently, scholars were able to find his real name. It was Bar Kosiba. It means nothing to you or to me, Bar Kosiba, but he was named in two ways. Bar Kokhba was the name that his admirers gave him because Kochav or Kochva in Aramaic means a star. Okay, so it sounds nice to be the son of the star. So he was the star. Those who did not follow him and thought that he was one of the biggest disasters to the Jewish people, instead of calling him Kosiba with an S, called him Koziba, which you need to know Aramaic to appreciate that. Koziba means liar. So choose the name, the star or the liar. Well, he was a star for a short period of time. He was able to defeat the Romans here and there for a short period, but then the Romans brought a huge army of over 50,000 soldiers. And I mentioned last week, just as a reference, Alexander the Great conquered almost the entire world with 45,000 soldiers. Okay, so the Romans didn't want to take any risks. They didn't come to play games. And the Jews were tiny. So they quenched this rebellion, and that was more or less the end of the great Jewish life in Judea, or in ancient Israel, if you will. They killed more or less, some say, between 400,000 to 500,000 people. They exiled the majority of the Jews to different parts of the Roman Empire. And this is a debate among scholars about the decrees that they issued. For example, they forbade studying Torah, they forbade circumcision. Everything that was crucial to the Jews was forbidden. Now, we always learn, that's how I learned, that all this punishment came after the rebellion of Bar Kokhba. But today there are some modern scholars, some newer scholars, who said that perhaps these punishment, this decrease came first, and the revolt was a consequence of this decrease. We don't really know. But just know that there are two opinions today. Either this huge punishment, the prohibitions against Shabbat, against Brit Milah, against circumcision, studying Torah, etc., either came before, and the result was the rebellion, or first was the rebellion, and that came as a punishment. The Talmud had some awful stories about it. This is the beginning of the martyrdom, because some of the greatest rabbis of the Talmud either supported Bar Kokhba because they believed that he was the Messiah. He argued that he was the Messiah. People in that place and time were ready for a Messiah because they knew that when things are so bad, that's when the Messiah will come. Things were so bad, and when somebody argued that he was the Messiah, and especially when the most learned, most respected rabbi of the time, Rabbi Akiva, said, Bar Kokhba is the Messiah, let's follow him, well, many people followed him and ended up dead. Rabbi Akiva himself was tortured to death. There's a story in the Talmud that the Romans really knew how to be cruel and how to kill people in the most devastating way. But when they killed him, they burned him alive and even put a scroll of Torah around him just to humiliate him and to cause him extra pain. And then the way the Talmud tells us the story is that his students were there near him and saw that he felt quite good. And they asked him, Rabbi, you're just being tortured to death. You're going to die in minutes. Why do you look so good? And why do you smile? And he said to them, all my life, when I prayed, I say the line, you shall love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And I never fully understood it. Only now, when I'm being tortured to death for teaching Torah, and I still love God, I have the opportunity to fulfill this mitzvah of loving God with all your heart, mind, and might. And he said the prayer of Shema Israel and died. That's why the reason that many people on their deathbed say the prayer of Shema. And we know that even during the Holocaust, those who understood that they did not go to showers, but went to gas chambers, they say Shema before they died. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva and this story that just happened around the revolt or Bar Kokhba is the source of it. Again, even though many Jews, or the big part of the Jewish population was exiled, these centers that I showed you that are on the map, especially Yavne and in the Galilee, remained Jewish. They had study halls there, or yeshivas if you want, academies. They kept studying and they kept having Jewish life. And when things are a little bit better in Israel and you go to visit, if you go up to the north, you can visit some of the ancient synagogues of Tzipori and some things in Tiberias, in Bet Alpha, in that area, because Jewish life never stopped despite everything. Audrey, I thought that you'll...
How old is that? And because I don't remember you referring to it in the past classes, and I'm just wondering now. I don't want to take you way off base, but if you could just...
No, it's a good question, and it's actually a good segue to what I wanted to say. So there are some references in the Bible itself, some of the prophets. For example, we have a line that God says, I'm going to send to you Elijah the prophet before the great awful day. So there was this notion for hundreds of years before that God will send a Messiah. Now, what a Messiah is, there was never a good definition. But they believe that there will be a leader with superpower, I don't really know, but somebody who will able to fight against the bad people, to bring all the Jews back from wherever they were in exile, back to Israel, to Judea, to Jerusalem, to defeat the bad guys, and to teach the entire world that the teaching of God, not to turn them into Jewish, but at least the idea of ethical monotheism will become the belief, the faith, the philosophy of everyone in the world. So when Jesus said that he was the Messiah, or when his disciples said that he was the Messiah, it was not so weird. It was not so out of line. And many people think that Jews and Christians separated because some of them believed that Jesus was the Messiah, some did not. That was not the issue. Many people at that time said they were the Messiahs, tried to convince others that they were the Messiah. The split really started when Paul and others said that God doesn't want us to follow the commandments, to live according to the mitzvot, because what is important is the creed, is what you believe, not what you do. And Jews believed in what you do for the most part and developed a whole system of halacha, of the Jewish law. But it's not about being the Messiah or not being the Messiah, because there was this feeling that it's just a matter of time. It's just going to happen. And we just have to be able to find the right men. Okay, so thank you for that question. So the centers, as you can see here, continued to develop. And in the year of 200, now if you follow this outline, something very important happened. Rabbi Judah the Prince, or Yehuda Nasi, or Judah the Patriarch, you'll find many different names, but Judah is the name, was the leader of the Jewish community, lived up in the Galilee, at least his last 20 years of his life. He was wise, he was politically savvy, he was compassionate, he was wealthy. He had everything that a good leader needed. And the Jews needed him, especially after Bar Kokhba revolt and all the decrees and punishment that followed. What he did in the year of 200 is extremely crucial. Until then, the Jews had the Bible, written Bible on scrolls. But that's all they wrote down. All the knowledge that they accumulated after the Bible was canonized, they passed them on from rabbi to a student, from rabbi to a student, but they didn't write it down. Hence, it was called the oral Torah. Okay, they even had laws forbidding writing the oral Torah. Now, to tell you that no rabbi had some secret notes, that all of them had a perfect memory, probably not exactly the case. But if they had notes, and they probably had, because we have some references, they were secret. I mentioned it, but I want to mention it again. The great rabbis had students who followed them, and these students had an amazingly good memory. They memorized what their teachers said. It's not to say that they were smart or able to analyze the material. Actually, the rabbis wanted people who didn't want to analyze or to criticize or to think critically. They just wanted people who can remember everything. So when a rabbi gave a lecture about the laws of Shabbat, he would refer to that student and said, what did I say about that issue? Can I push the stroller on Shabbat? And then the student immediately went to his brain and gave him the answer. But at the year of 200, Judah the Prince decided enough with this memorizing everything. It's time to write everything down. And he explained, he said, had things been perfect, we wouldn't have had the need. But now, when Jews live all over the world, when the Romans keep hurting us, we need to put things down so future generations will know. So he took all the Jewish knowledge that was available at that time. Just think about this project. He didn't have a computer. He didn't have ChatGPT. He collected everything and edited the first compilation that is called Mishnah. So the Mishnah has 6 orders, 6 sections, and each one of them is divided to many different tractates. So for example, one of the orders is called Zmanim, which means special or sacred times. And it's divided to Tractate Shabbat, that has the laws of Shabbat. Tractate Rosh Hashanah, that deals with Rosh Hashanah, okay, etc. There is no Tractate Hanukkah. Remember, the rabbis didn't like Hanukkah. There's almost no mention of Hanukkah at all in the Mishnah, and in a short time I'll talk about the Talmud, okay? The only reference to Hanukkah is actually in Tractate Shabbat, when they discuss what kinds of candles, what kind of wicks and oil are kosher for Shabbat candles. Somebody mentioned the idea of Hanukkah. What can we use for Hanukkah? But that's it, okay? They didn't like Hanukkah. So that was his project, and this is huge. And that was compiled at the year of 200 CE, a book that we still study a lot. Now, what did the future generations do with the Mishnah? By the way, I'm saying the Mishnah, but then they edited another volume of all the material that never made it into the Mishnah, called it Tosefta, but that's a different story. But rabbis now had the Mishnah, they read these laws, studied them, and what do rabbis do? Debate, right? And they started to debate. And then, that's the amazing thing, for 300 years, they recorded these debates. And that's something that is hard to really to fathom unless you've lived in this milieu, which I was lucky. Back then, I thought that I was miserable. Now I appreciate my childhood of living, of studying in yeshiva and spending 5-6 hours a day doing that. The most important thing is the debate. They cared very little about the bottom line, what was the final rule. It's rarely, the Mishnah and later on the Talmuds rarely even mention what the final rule. And today, our culture is just the opposite. We cannot debate. We cannot talk with people who disagree with us, especially when we talk about politics and other things. So we just don't talk, or we hate each other and don't invite them for Thanksgiving. But we try to avoid it because we know what happens. They had a completely opposite attitude. We debate because we know that we have our opinion, but other people have their own opinion. We have to respect, and we have to show them that they are wrong. But use your intellect, your deductive abilities to do that. Don't just call them names and uninvite them, okay? But they took the time. They didn't have Twitter or things that you can just express your opinion in 2 seconds and move on. That's what they did. And they recorded not just the majority opinion, but also the minority opinion. So for about 300 years, rabbis studied the Mishnah and kept adding that. And there were 2 centers of the recording of these discussions, of these debates. One, it's called, when they compiled it and turned it into a book, it's called the Jerusalem Talmud. But now you know, Jerusalem was forbidden for Jews. So even though we call it the Jerusalem Talmud, it was not written in Jerusalem. It was written up in the Galilee and in Yavne, in these 2 dots that you still have up on the map. That's the Jerusalem Talmud. In English, for the most part, if you read, you will find the name, the Palestinian Talmud, which is accurate, but today everything is politically loaded, because after the Bar Kokhba revolt, there was no more Israel, there was no more Judea. This land, its name was changed to Syria-Palestina. So from 135, it was Palestina. And when my grandmother moved from Vilna to that land in 1936, she moved to Palestina. Okay, that was the only name people used. And I know now, because it's so hard to talk about the Palestinian Jews versus the Palestinian Arab, but that was the reality, and that's the accurate name. There was no Israel or Judea before 1948. So from 135 to May 14th, 1948, this is Palestina or Palestine. The land of the Philistines, the Roman wanted people to think of, not the land of the Jews. Okay, so if you hear people or read people talking about Palestine before 1948, this is accurate. This is not taking a political side or making a political statement. It's really important to remember that. Today we have to be a little bit careful, or at least the way I explain it now. Okay? So at the year of about 400, we have the Jerusalem or the Palestinian Talmud codified in the Galilee, in Judea, and let me choose for you another map. After the Bar Kokhba revolt, the majority of the Jews were exiled to Babylon. So you see Jerusalem on the map here, or let's say even the Galilee here, and they moved mainly to where you see Iraq here, or Babylon back then, and their centers were here, mostly around the Euphrates. So this is the Tigris River, and this is the Euphrates River, and most of the Jews lived there. And that became the most important center of the Jewish world. Babylonia, and with the important centers of Sura, Mechoza, and Pompedita, okay, which are, as you see, near Baghdad today. That's where they wrote the Babylonian Talmud and many other important books. Now, we have a Talmud that was written in Israel or in the Galilee or in Palestine, and we have one that was written in Babylon. Which one is more important? By far the Babylonian Talmud, because the community of the Jews in Israel was tiny, important, busy, studying and teaching and doing things. But the most important one was in Babylon, in these centers. And the Babylonian Talmud is many times larger than the Jerusalem Talmud. This is one volume of the Babylonian Talmud from my library. I have to admit, I don't use it a lot because everything is online and it's much easier to access. No, it's a good thing, but I have the complete set of the Talmud in this edition has 72 books. Yeah, so this is volume number 72. If you don't believe me, you can come and check. So just to show you the magnitude of this scholarship, okay? So the Talmud is the rabbis, after the Mishnah, around 200 was compiled, they took the text of the Mishnah and started to study it in depth and debated it. And not just that they debated it, they like to tell us stories as by the way, and they recorded them, okay? So for example, I don't know, they didn't have the question about schlepping a baby stroller on Shabbat, which, by the way, is a big halachic question today, if you can use a baby stroller or not. But somebody can say, you know what, baby stroller. And then somebody can say, you know what, my daughter just bought the best baby stroller in the world, all carbon fiber, an amazing thing. And somebody will start to talk about strollers, and then somebody will talk about great babies, whatever, and say, okay, guys, let's go back to talk about the laws of Shabbat. Okay, so it's not exactly like that, but a lot is. And that's why the Talmud has the greatest stories, because they're smart enough to record all these side stories and side conversations, and not all, but a lot of them. And even if you're not really interested in the minutiae of the laws of Shabbat, there are great stories that you read and enjoy and learn a lot, okay? So the center of Judaism shifted to Babylon. Now, this is only part of it, because the Roman Empire were huge, if you remember from last week. Actually, I have a, okay, and they exiled the Jews. This is not, I didn't bring it. Yeah, the Roman, you see the orange and the yellow? I brought it for a different purpose that I'll talk about, but they exiled the Jews all over. But the diaspora in Babylon became the most learned one and the most important one. But they were all over Europe, a huge Jewish community in Rome that was transferred to Rome as slaves. Okay? So this is it. Any questions? Okay. Oh, sorry. No, thank you for.
So the Talmud is the discussions that took place among the rabbis.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and the Babylonian Talmud is the one that took place in Iraq.
In Iraq, in Babylon, in few specific centers, yes. And around the year of 500, it was codified, and that's a Talmud. And what do you think the rabbis did after they had a set written Talmud? They continue to argue and to study, but that's what you do.
But it all derived from the Mishnah, right?
Yeah, so everything started with the Mishnah, the first document. All the discussions about the Mishnah were compiled and codified as the Talmud, or the Talmuds in plural. And then we have tens of thousands of different books were written by different rabbis. By the way, the times of the Mishnah and even the Talmud, only few of the rabbis use the title rabbi. Okay? So sometimes they just refer to them, for example, as Shmuel, one of the greatest Babylonian rabbi. His name was Shmuel. It's not Rabbi Shmuel, it's just Shmuel. Only later on it became a title of, let's say, a Jewish teacher. But rabbi really means or meant back then a teacher, or like sir or master in a connotation of teaching. Okay, and this word depends, sometimes it's Rabbi and Rav and Rabba, and there are many variations of the same word. Okay, so if sometimes you see just a name, it's not disrespect, because that's how they're known in the Talmud. Christianity. In the beginning, Christianity was a Jewish sect, open for Jews, not for Gentiles. Okay? And some Jews liked it, some didn't like it. In the beginning, they even worshipped at the same places. Because, you know, you believe in that, I believe in that, but still, they were very close. But they kept getting further and further from each other. Later on, they opened it not only to Jews, the Christians, but to Gentiles, to the pagans, and tried to convince them to change their ways and to adopt the new religion. But the major thing that I included here is when the emperor of Rome, Constantine, at the year of 312, adopted Christianity as the religion of the Roman Empire. And all of a sudden, from a fringe religion, sometimes even persecuted by the Romans and others, it became the official religion of the big empire. What Constantine did, I'm going to show you my... Okay, he moved the capital of the empire from Rome to a new city that he called Constantinople, because his name was Constantine. Okay? Today, Istanbul. But we're jumping here. Okay? So Constantinople became the center of the Roman Empire, not Rome. And that's the beginning of what we call the Byzantine Empire. So here it's a nice map that I like. On the orange side, you see the eastern part of the Byzantine Empire, and on the left side, you see the western. And the eastern was the sophisticated, the wealthy, the stronger side. Later on, it's not a class about Christianity, as tempting as it is. Today, you know that there are two main parts of the, at least the Catholic religion. One is the Western, with the Pope in Rome. The one are the Eastern side, with the Patriarch. Okay, so sometimes they celebrate Christmas in different times and different things. And this is really the division. Because for many years, still today, they had two heads of the church. The Pope was always in Rome, and the head of the Patriarch of the Eastern Christianity was in Constantinople. Okay, just for you, and this is the time to remember it. When not all Christians or not all Catholics follow the Pope in Rome. There are other Eastern Christian groups that are quite big and important. When you travel to Jerusalem, you'll see a lot of amazingly beautiful churches that are Eastern. Okay? They are from Russia, they are from Greece, okay? Armenia, not from Rome. They don't have to report to the Pope. Constantine took over, occupied, I'll just use Palestine. It's hard for me to say Palestine, not because of political reasons, but it's still in my head, it's Israel. And he was okay for when it came to the Jews. Of course, the Jews had to be second-class citizens, but the Jews had to get used to it, because after they lost, from now on, they will remain second-class citizens, and that's in good times, when they were not forced to convert or when they were not massacred. And it really depends on the ruler and the place. Sometimes it just meant that they were not allowed to hold some occupations. Sometimes it meant that they couldn't have Christian slaves. Slavery was prominent back then. It meant different things in different times. And sometimes it meant that they had to live in a specific area, like a ghetto, even though they didn't use the term ghetto, but that's what it is, that was restricted only to Jews. Sometimes it meant that they had to wear something on their garment that identified them as Jews. The Nazis were not the first to come up with this idea, okay? But under Christian regimes, they were second-class citizens, again, when things were good. The irony today when you follow politics is that the lives of the Jews was much better under the Muslims. Much, much better under the Muslims. So this animosity between Jews and Muslims is a modern phenomenon that really started with the Zionist movement, more or less, which we will get to at the end of today and in the next weeks, okay? The Muslims, now let me start with the Christians. Christians developed the theology, and it's not that there is one consistent theology, but when they looked at the Jews were supposed to disappear because the Christians replaced the Jews. Hence, the Old Covenant, the Old Testament and Covenant are the same. So first, they believed they were Jews, and God had a covenant with them. Hence, the Bible is important. The Jewish Bible is important to them. But then came Jesus, And God was really angry with the Jews. They didn't understand what God wanted from God, and God replaced them with a new group of people, with the Christians, okay? I super duper oversimplified it, but we have to understand why, okay? It's important. Now, what happens when God replaces something? When you replace the brakes in your car, you discard the old ones and you put new ones. The problem was that the old ones didn't disappear. The Jews did not disappear. And from time to time, there were Christian leaders who thought that it was their divine task to make the Jews disappear, or at least to make the Jews suffer, okay? To show, to demonstrate that they were wrong and they are being punished constantly, like God hates you, symbol on your head, okay? And they thought that they should not leave it to reality to happen, but they should do it. Again, not all of them, and this is, we don't have time to go from different pope to, but that was more or less the approach. And of course, let's not forget that at one point, the doctrine was that the Jews killed Jesus. Okay, so didn't help them to like us. Christians had, and Muslims had a different approach. They were much more humble. They, of course, believed that they are the right ones, they are the best, but they acknowledge that they are the youngest monotheistic religion. And the father of the religion is not Muhammad, it's Abraham. Ibrahim. He started the whole thing, okay? So they refer to the Jews and then to the Christians, whom they also respect, as older siblings. Not the best, not the smartest, not the most successful, but they deserve at least some respect, or they deserve to be treated fairly. If you want to go to the top, you should convert to Islam. See the light and convert. But even if you don't, they were the protected ones. Who were not the protected ones? The pagans. So the pagans either convert or die. But Jews and Christians are still monotheistic religions. They believe in one God, and therefore should be tolerated, should be protected. And I emphasize this word because were known as the protected people. Okay? So Jews, except of rare occasions, because there are always some crazy, brutal leaders, did much better under Muslim regimes. Okay? Remember it. Because the majority, or a huge part of the Jews lived in Arab countries until 1948-9, when they were expelled from them. Okay, all the Mizrahi Jews or Sephardic Jews that we use today. Okay, so that's really important to know, to notice. So under the Byzantine times, Jews were allowed to stay there. They were sort of tolerated. Any questions or comments? Okay, so, yes, Ron.
Reading that there were many little villages of Jews throughout there. It wasn't just in the main city. They were like in Saudi Arabia, and that the historical account was saying that these small communities of Jews were told by Saladin before he wound up fighting the Christians to convert or.
Yeah, we didn't get yet to Saladin, but yes, there were Jews all over, and Even recently, there was a little program, I saw a video about the last Jew of Iran, oh, not Iran, I don't even remember. There are still Jewish communities in Arab countries. So there was something about the synagogue, there is only one poor, in Iraq, I believe, one poor Jewish man that still tries to keep this synagogue, and he will be the last person there. But there were Jews all over the Arab world. Okay, so Israel or Jerusalem is under Christian occupation during, that's called the Byzantine period. Let's move to the second page. And then Jerusalem becomes important to the Muslims in the early 7th century. There is a famous story in the Quran, and it's told later on in other Muslim scriptures, that one night the Prophet Muhammad was woken up by the Archangel Gabriel. So the Muslim adopted a lot of Jewish people and even some of the angels, like Gabriel is one of the Jewish angels. And Gabriel woke him up, told him to go up on this magical horse that took him from outside of Mecca, Saudi Arabia, to Jerusalem. And it was sort of a magical thing. There are different versions. I'm far from being an expert of Islam. But Muhammad did what Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, told him, jump on this magical horse, came to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem, that's exactly where he went to. And from Jerusalem, he went up on his magical horse to heaven. But it's important. Now I understand why Jerusalem is so important to the Muslims. Okay, because it's the third most important site for them, for Islam, after Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. And it's connected to one of the most important stories of Islam, the night in which Muhammad moved from Mecca, Jerusalem, heaven. And on that site where Muhammad landed, they built the Dome of the Rock Mosque that is still there today. This is a picture from now. Looks more or less the same, or looks the same. This is from now. Okay, one of the most magnificent buildings. It's interesting, whenever you look at the picture of Jerusalem, you always see it. Because, yeah, that's what you see, the Dome of the Rock, because it's beautiful. It's this golden dome that is tremendous. You see it from everywhere, and it's very impressive. Here's the problem. I mean, it's a huge problem that I shouldn't even smile, because one day it might develop into the end of humanity. Where exactly is this Dome of the Rock was built, according at least to Jewish belief? Exactly on the site where the second temple was and the first temple. Okay? So this is exactly the site of the temple that the Romans destroyed at the year of 70. So what we have today, the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall, is just part of the outer wall, not even of the temple itself. Okay, there were many walls in Jerusalem, the retaining wall. Okay? Now, forget about history for a second, but now there are more and more Messianic Jews in Israel, and some of them have tremendous political power. That's the reality. I'm not going to expand them a lot on that. They want to build the third temple, the third Jewish temple. There's only one location in which you're allowed to build the third temple. You have to build it there. It's called, in Hebrew, it's Har HaBayit. That's the only legitimate place. What do you need to do in order to build a Jewish temple where there is a mosque that has been standing there for about more than 1,300 years? You have to get rid of the mosque. Now we start to understand how history and politics work together. What happens if some crazies will blow up this important mosque? Okay, so I mention it not because I want to elaborate, but I just want you to see how it's all connected and how we can never get away from our history and the history of Islam and Christianity. Okay? So that's the location of the Dome of the Rock, and that's why Jerusalem was so important to the Muslims since the 7th century. But Jerusalem was also important to, nobody cared about the Jews because they had absolutely no power, so nobody cared. The Christians, okay? And when the Muslims became powerful, they occupied Jerusalem from the Byzantines, from the Christians, okay? Now, they tolerated the Christians and the Jews much better than the Christians tolerated the others, but still, one of the most important and sacred places for Christianity, Jerusalem, because that's where Jesus was crucified and lives, right? Now became Muslim. So from being a Christian side, it became a Muslim side. So when you remember your history about the Crusades, the main goal of the Crusades was to recapture Jerusalem from the hand of the Muslims and turn it again to the way it should be, a Christian site. And we Jews, yeah, but what about us? We were there first. Not yet, right? It's really fascinating to talk about it at 2024, when we know who controls Jerusalem today. But my grandparents were not so optimistic. And before 1967, these areas was not even under the control of Israel. Okay, that was the east side of Jerusalem. This mosque and the Western Wall and other sites were controlled by the Jordanians, which, by the way, still the Jordanians are there. Israel asked them to be there, and they are sort of the local police. It's like you go to Washington, D.C., there are a million kinds of police there. You don't know that. All this car try to find out who is the police officer. It's the same up there, and part of there are Jordanians. And even before there was peace agreement between Israel and Jordan, Jordanian police, I call it, it's called the Waqf. They controlled the area because they didn't want to upset the Muslims, because this is a place for Muslims. And more, since we have these geniuses in the Knesset, like Ben Gvir, if you heard the name, these extremely right-wing crazies, they keep walking there all the time to show that we control it and we can do whatever we want. And there was an understanding since '67 that Jews can go. I was there, but you do it quietly. You know, you can go to a mosque even today. Like Muslim can come to any synagogue they want. It's not prohibited. But you don't go there with an Israeli flag and make a huge deal like you are occupying this mosque. But that's what they do. And now every year they have a march, a special march of Jews in Israeli flags exactly there. And then there are some riots. And okay, so Jerusalem always attracted extremists from all over the place.
Where did they come from?
Where the Messianic Jews came from. You have to wait, because we'll talk about Kabbalah and we'll talk about other things. But let me move a little bit faster, because, okay, so let's just move to the Crusades, 1099. The Crusaders, the Christians, decided it's time to recapture Jerusalem. Now, sometimes we like to read books about these wonderful knights, and they hated the Jews more than they hated anyone else. Even though they came to defeat the Muslims, they hated the Jews. So as they were traveling from Europe to Israel, to Jerusalem, to reconquer Jerusalem, or reconquista, that's the term, whenever they had an opportunity to go by a Jewish village or something, they would not miss an opportunity to kill some Jews. Okay, even though the Crusades were a war against the Muslims. But something to remember. So the first crusade was quite successful. The Christians occupied or reoccupied, reconquered Jerusalem from the Muslims. And again, Jerusalem is now a Christian city. And each time, you know, you take down the mosque, you build new churches, you take down churches, you build mosques, right? And it's a tiny place. You've been to Jerusalem. The old city is tiny. And they were all fighting over it. And then you mention Saladin or Salah-ad-Din, who reconquered Jerusalem now from the Christians. And Salah-ad-Din or Saladin became the Muslim ruler of Jerusalem. And Saladin was nice to the Jews. And there is a document that I don't have the time to read for you, because one of his main physicians of Saladin, he lived in Cairo, or in that area that was the center of his empire of Saladin. One of his main doctors was Maimonides, the extremely important Jewish rabbi, scholar, physician, etc. Because remember what I said in the beginning, Muslims treated the Jews quite well, and there was even a period, we call it the golden period in Spain, in which there was a lot of interaction between Jewish, Muslim, and Christian cultures. When they all learned from each other, they all exchanged opinions. Jews definitely benefited a lot from the Muslims, because it gave them a chance to learn a lot of not just Muslim wisdom, but a lot of Greek wisdom that they probably read in Arabic. Okay, so we know that Maimonides was very much influenced by Aristotle, but he did not read Aristotle in Greek. He read it in Arabic. Okay? And Maimonides was one of the doctors, and in one of these most beautiful letters, he describes how every single day he had to go from Phosphate, that's where the place in Egypt where he lived. Maimonides tried to live in Israel, and it didn't work out well, because it was quite miserable to live there for Jews. So he moved to Egypt, where he worked and died. So he said every morning he had to go to the palace of Saladin, where he had to take care of the children of Saladin, and if somebody at the court needed a doctor, that was him. So he had to schlep from where he was, and then he went back and came to his own house. He was a physician. Guess what he had to do? He had to take care of his own people. Okay, they didn't give him a break. Oh, you spend the whole morning at the palace of Saladin, now you can go home and take a nap. So he said he was exhausted, but then he had to take care of, as a doctor, of all the Jewish people of his community. And only then did he have some time to study and to write? Now, I don't believe there was anyone any more prolific single Jewish writer than Maimonides. So despite not having time, he somehow found time to write a lot. And his writings are still the most important ones and are still studied. And not only Jewish stuff. He also wrote medical books. The people back then, I don't know how, some of them were different. They just knew everything about everything and found the time to have the deepest understanding and knowledge and write and teach. It's quite incredible. We like the term Renaissance person, right? But many of them were these kind of Renaissance before there was Renaissance. Just everything they found interesting. Astronomy at the time was a serious science. So he was an important astronomer too. That's what they were, these people. So this is Jews under Muslim regime. Let's see what else do I really need to mention. I gave you much more information that I'm going to mention, but in the 16th century, we have a new ruler over Jerusalem that stayed there until the First World War, the Ottoman Empire. Okay? They conquered Jerusalem. They conquered not just Jerusalem, the entire area of Palestine. It was part of the Ottoman Empire, and they controlled it until the end of World War I, where our story will continue next week, right? Because they lost the war, and then we have the French and the British people. I'm not going to take much more time because I apologize for last week. I took too much time, and I was reprimanded by doing that. No, there's so much I have to cover, 4,000 years in 6 weeks. So, and everything is important, and there's so many great stories that I need to share with you. So just 1 second, I want to see yes?
The Ottomans were the Turks?
Yes, yes. If you take a course in university, there are some differences, but Ottoman Empire, we can use that term. It's a little bit anachronistic. At one point, it's like calling the Jews Abraham a Jew, because there were no Jews, but it's good enough for most discussions. They were the Turks, yes. During that time, now we are moving a little bit to Europe. I focused on the land of Israel for the most part. The Jews in Europe didn't have great time under the Christians, a lot of anti-Semitism. They were not allowed to join many guilds, which means they could not have many different occupations, professions. For the most part, they were not allowed to own land, so they couldn't be farmers. Many of them ended up being money lenders, and nobody liked their landlords or their mortgage company, especially since when they don't have money to pay. Okay? You asked me, and I think that's a good time to talk about it. When things were really bad, especially after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. So Jews were expelled from many different places in Europe. From England, Jews were not allowed to live in England between 1270 and 1560 until Cromwell. Why? Because they didn't like the Jews. But there weren't so many Jews there. There were about 3,000 Jews who were expelled from England. There were Jews who were expelled from France in different times, from different cities that later on became part of Italy. Okay, it was a nice game that some people like to play. Oh, let's get rid of our Jews. You know, sometimes it made sense because if you're a ruler and you owe money to the Jews because you needed to borrow money to finance your wars, to finance your building endeavors, etc., and you don't want to pay back, Jews out. Okay, so again, I oversimplify things, but not all came from deep theological, religious beliefs that we don't want Jewish influence on us. A lot was just follow the money, okay? Yeah, no, it's reality is reality. So when things were quite bad and the main expulsion of Jews was from Spain, and everyone here should remember exactly what year it happened because it's an important year for everyone here, 1492. Okay, it's funny, when I studied history in Israel, 1492 was really important because of the expulsion from Spain. It took me years to learn that this year also has some meaning to some other people in the world. But no, when you study history in Israel, you study Jewish history, you study European history because it's relevant, as you can see, to Jewish history. But you hardly study anything about America because America was irrelevant for, we're talking still about times there was no America. There was America, but there was no United States, right? So it was just not important. So 1492, of course, the year when Isabella and Fernando and Isabella expelled the Jews. Okay, that's what you study. But that's already a bigger and really important number. We don't know. If you have time and want to enjoy, just Google how many Jews were expelled from Spain. You'll get numbers from...
Is that a message? Is that a message?
Yeah, okay, 4 minutes, I promise. You'll get numbers from 90,000 to almost 1 million, which is quite a range. Probably something like 250,000. I think the historians whom I follow believe that we're talking about 50,000 families, something like that. And it's about 250,000 people. This is huge. This is like 5 Jupiters. And the world was much smaller, okay? And Jews did very well in Spain. I don't know how many of you had the chance to go to Spain and to visit some Jewish places. I did it many years ago. And, I just followed the places I know, where all these amazingly important Jewish philosophers, rabbis lived, and all you see is a plaque. Or you see a mosque or a church that used to be a synagogue. There's very little there, okay? But that was an important center that tolerated the Jews, that allowed the Jews to flourish until it stopped.
Do you have any idea how many Jews stayed in Spain?
It's very hard to know because those who stayed in Spain were forced to convert. So you heard about, it's not a PC, it's not a word we should use, but many of us grew up with the word Marranos, right? Those were the Jews who were forced to convert. We don't use it because it means the pigs. Okay, so we use different words. No, I didn't know, all of us in this room used words that today we wouldn't use, correct? But that's what we learned in my books, that it's not that we had anything against them. So the Marranos or the conversos stayed there and, assimilated. In Portugal, a few years later, the Jews didn't get the option of converting, of leaving. So they were forced to convert. And they say in Portugal that there isn't even one family without some Jewish blood, because there were many Jewish people who were forced. Some of them were somehow able to escape to Holland, believe it or not, like the family of the famous Benedicto Spinoza, the philosopher, and others. If you visit in Amsterdam, Rembrandt house, for example, that was the Jewish community of Jews who were able to escape from Portugal around that time. That's why Rembrandt knew a lot about the Jews and even has some paintings that depict the Jews. These were that was the neighborhood where he lives. Okay, really bad things. Jews are expelled from everywhere. They are being persecuted by the Christians. That's the beginning of Kabbalah. Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism, okay? And when you talk about messianic things, it's not directly related to, but that's when you start thinking about life in a different way, in a more mystical way. So,
But they're on television and they want you to convert to them.
what, the Kabbalah people?
Not the Kabbalah, the Messianic Jews.
Oh, you're talking about a different group. I apologize.
Yeah.
What you were talking about, this is a different group. There is a group that is called Messianic Judaism,
Yes, right.
which is a Christian group.
Right.
They have nothing to do with Judaism.
But they make it
Okay, just Jehovah Witnesses, even though they have the name of the Jewish God, Yahweh, they are not Jews. Okay? No, that's a Christian sect. Like there are 350, I think, official Christian groups here. This is one of them. When I talked about Messianic Jew, thank you for asking it, because I think that some people are confused. I'm talking about people who live today in Israel. People who live today in Israel, who believe that Israel has to go back to what it was in biblical times, as I mentioned, to rebuild the temple. And by doing it, the way to do it, you have to get rid of the non-Jews. Or if not to get rid completely, you have to subject them. Okay, so a lot of this tension, and now these people are in power in Israel. So when you hear this name Ben Gvir and Smotrich and all these people who use Netanyahu like puppeteers because they have complete control over Netanyahu, they want chaos in the Middle East. Because they believe, as Jews believed during the Second Temple, that when things are really bad, when there will be a huge war, the Messiah will come. Okay, so that's their theology. And after October 7th, 2023, some of them identified it as the beginning of this messianic time. And they're just waiting for the opportunity. So they're just waiting for a big war that will end, they believe, with the coming of the Messiah and rebuilding of the temple. So next week, we are going just to talk a little bit about the awful life of the Jews in Europe, about the pogroms in Europe, and the beginning of the Zionist movement. And not just the Zionist movement, and the beginning of the Jews coming back to Palestine. Okay, and yes? Not at all. The Ark of the Covenant disappeared, was not even at the Second Temple. Sorry?
Ethiopia claims that they have it.
Maybe they have it. Last time I saw the Ark was in the first Indiana Jones. No, it's a great movie. But it's something that most Jews don't. There was no Ark of the Covenant even at the Second Temple. Sai? No, but it's irrelevant. There's no record that King David ever existed. There is why the Crusaders didn't do. You know what? I don't have an accurate answer, but this place has been renovated many times, and you don't know how damaged it was And I didn't study the history of the Dome of the Rock. But there is a very good chance, from the little I remember, that when Saladin reconquered it, they renovated it. You know, every regular house has to be renovated once in a while, and if you don't do it, it looks awful. So just think about a place like that. And the dome itself was renovated recently. There is no lack of Muslim money coming from the Gulf states. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, and I hope that you will join me next week. Thank you.